Hello, I'm Daniel Frankel, CEO and co-founder of NextTMT. I'm here with the editor of NextTMT Networks, Dan Jones, on a Friday. He's in New York, I'm in LA, and some cool stuff in the telecommunications technology business today. Well, I mean, depending on how you look at it, we got a guy who's got $1 trillion or more in net worth. And Elon Musk. Dan, you've been tracking the IPO of SpaceX. I know you're thrilled today. You've been
Oh
drinking and
yeah,
all day at his plunder.
yeah.
So
Nothing I like better.
that was fast. I mean, he had 238 billion in change, fallen fast. X was a mess. He had ruined his reputation with Doge, and nobody was buying his cars. That was about a year ago.
Hmm.
And then all of a sudden, we're celebrating the brilliant visionary entrepreneur that is Elon Musk. I mean, he was on this week talking about satellite data centers. And I like to think that I'm a strident fellow, been doing journalism for a while. I can see through your angle. And I'm like, wow, he seems to have this could work. I bought it hook, line, and sinker. I mean, he's a confounding guy because he's so
Right.
lame in some ways and so brilliant in others. Anyway, what do you make of this big IPO? It's finally here. What are the surprises? What did we learn?
Well, they raised 75 billion from it. That's right, isn't it?
Yeah, I
I
think they
think.
met their funding goal of
Yes, they
cashish.
did. Yes. Well, I mean, it's great for him because it's going to give him a big bank for dealing with the SpaceX launches and things like that, and all the other things that he wants to do, like the Optimus industrial robot, which is basically just talk right now rather than any kind of product. But he's got money to deal with all of this now.
Well, it costs a lot of money to, I mean, he wants to do lots of satellites for different
Yeah, no, I know.
businesses. He wants to build data centers up there, which we'll get to that in a second. He wants to, as we've talked about, start a new mobile broadband business. Well, he's already done
Right.
that with Starlink. It's got 10 million users. And I guess to even get into his ambitions, you need billions of dollars to launch rockets. And
Yeah, yeah, indeed. The point of the rocket launch and all of that is SpaceX is way ahead of any other contender in this game. I wrote about Amazon Leo last week, and they've got a big kind of catch up to do if Jeff Bezos, another fabulous billionaire, is going to actually meet any of his goals in space, as it were, because
yeah,
SpaceX is so far ahead.
I read your article in last week's Next TFT Networks, and it looked like it was almost insurmountable at this point in terms of just the amount of capacity orbiting the Earth that Starlink has versus
Yeah,
Leo. How does that work functionally? I mean, this is Elon Musk. He's got a fair amount of capacity. He's already got distribution, DDD distribution in places like, I don't know, was it Australia, New Zealand?
right.
Maybe how is he ahead in functional components? Can we talk about that?
Well, the satellites are the functional components, and I don't actually remember off the top of my head exactly how many satellites he has up, but he has thousands of first generation satellites up. He has hundreds of the second generation ones, which are the ones that can do the direct to mobile phone kind of communications. And he wants thousands of the third generation satellite up. And I don't think the FCC is going to stop him from doing that. In fact, I think they're very keen for him to do that. So he's basically got pieces in place. It's just some of what he says he will be able to do is just not, no one's able to do it because no one can actually break the laws of physics.
Right.
That's just how it is.
He was interviewed on his own platform by his own people last week on
Right.
X, and he talked about his quest to build data centers
Right.
in space. And on one level, it makes a lot of sense, cooling because you're in space, and there's the power of the sun.
Yeah.
I forget what the scientific nomenclature is. There's a law for it that if a extraterrestrial visitor of an advanced species came and visited us, how would they assess us? And we score
Right.
very, he's got to flex his ego and show you how on a broad plane he thinks. I noticed that he has to establish that. But he gets
Right.
to the meat of what he's trying to say is really, we have the satellites that can do this now. and we can launch them. And it's just a matter of driving down the cost a little bit. And he's got some analysts who say, yeah, I mean, it's right now, it's 4 to 1. It costs 4 times as much for satellite compute versus terrestrial compute. But over
Right,
the next
right.
years, with based on today's investment, I guess, he could get that cost down to a 30% differential. At that point, it becomes enticing. And so maybe we can talk holistically about what he wants to do. He would control the data center, he would control the network processing,
Mm,
and the only thing he wouldn't control is the terrestrial system in big metropolitan and
right,
populated
right,
areas that
right.
pass around.
I mean, but not really just big metropolitan areas. Any area that has buildings made of concrete and steel are not going to be able to receive his communications because the satellite signal can't go through concrete and steel. So there we go. But on the data centers, there's 2 points I'd like to address on that. One is the latency from space, because latency, the time it takes to get the data from the satellites to the actual earthbound compute devices, that's going to be fairly long. So there's not going to be a data center that deals with, say, financial trading or things like that, because it's just going to take too long to actually receive that information. So that's one point where that makes his kind of like, it's cool in space. So that makes everything all right.
So this is my outsider's 101 perspective. I was looking at it as a commodity, a data center is a data center, but
Yeah.
there are limitations, profound ones in terms of that particular gambit, you're saying?
Oh, yeah. No, I mean, literally, if you're doing financial, quite a few kind of factory kind of enterprise based things, and definitely military kind of things that use a data center. You want it to be as near as instantaneous as possible, which means that basically a space based data center won't be able to serve you because you just can't receive the data in time.
Right.
And the other thing, and I don't see many people talking about this or anyone, well, there probably are people talking about it. But remember that all these micro nano satellites, they have a limited life. So
Right.
you can put a center in space, but it's only going to be able to be in space for about 3 years. I think that's right, 3 years before it actually has to be cut down. But I don't know exactly what's going to happen to all the amazing amounts of space junk that are already up there. If you can't actually deliver data center services for a long time with that, because they just won't last that long.
Who was it? Alfonso Cuarón, George Clooney, Sandra Bullock, that movie that came out a decade
Yeah.
ago, Gravity? I mean, that was a pretty compelling demonstration, and there's another scientific principle talking about the cascading catastrophe. If one satellite hits another, creates a shower of myriad other objects that hit other objects, and it creates this sort of expanding catastrophe.
Oh, yeah. Something like that or something similar to that is in our future because there's just so many satellites up there already. And there's just millions, probably millions more going up because it's not just SpaceX and Amazon, it's Chinese government, possibly the Indian government and European ventures and things like that. So it's going to be such crowded space.
I think that's what is most confounding about Musk is that he's a guy who we've been talking about folks my age. I don't know how you are. I've been around for a while, and about electric cars. We've had them for a while. He's the guy who made them mass producible, and that's
Oh,
had
yeah.
if it hadn't been waylaid by our current federal administration,
Right.
be onto a serious dent in this little problem we have about greenhouse gases. And then he talks about saving the species through extraterrestrial exploration, a multi-planet species. And then he turns around and then talks
Yeah.
about a very obvious plundering. This situation looks really dire with that many satellites trying to occupy the same space at the same time. Like
Oh
you
yeah,
said, a collision isn't just likely, it seems inevitable,
right,
but
right.
there seems to be contradiction and conflict in him, much
Oh
conflict
yeah,
in him. But what was it? Axios this week says the age of impunity. I mean, I think when you have $1 trillion, they let you do it, as they
yeah. They do.
you can grab
They
anything.
certainly do.
So let's go on to other topics. I want to reach back to your issue, but we'll go to one that you're going to focus on this week in Tuesday's issue, 6G, which it seemed
Yes,
like we
yes.
got through this massive hype spending cycle and took a little breather, but nobody's
Yeah.
spending anything, so we got to wind up another one. So
Oh
talk
yeah.
about
Well, and no one will be spending anything on G until 2029 because we're just at the nuts and bolts level right now. It's
yeah.
just being created right now. It's not even anything beyond vaporware right now. And I've said right now a few times there, but
In the broad strokes, what are we trying to solve for that 5G didn't address?
well, the thing that a lot of network vendors like Nokia and Ericsson are really interested in is G sensing, which they also call ISAC, which is integrated sensing and communication, which basically is combining your traditional network communication with censoring sensors, almost like a radar kind of situation on the network, which can detect passive objects and things like that. Now, the thing that's, again, this is all slides right now, but the thing
Right.
that is possibly somewhat of an impediment to that is one of the other reasons that operators are really keen on 6G is it isn't supposed to be as expensive as 5G was to deploy because they're going to use 5G standalone core as the basis for 6G, or at
Right.
least that's as intended right now.
Maybe you could take, I'm sure some of the viewers might not know this, most of them will. I don't. What was involved in that sort of nuts and bolts transition to 5G? You had to go tower by tower and just swap everything out? Is that how it worked? Or
You have to go, I mean, you will have to do this with 6G as well, but you have to go and swap all the radios out on the towers or add to them basically because you're still going to want to support 4G and they still are supporting 4G. But you add to the tower stack, should we call it, and add radios. And they also went to the buildings that contained what they call a core network, which manages calls and user data and things like that. And they had to rip that out and rip it out, but they had to put the new thing to support 5G in. And the thing with 6G, they won't have to do that because they're going to use G core, standalone 5G core to support 6G.
so they could get off the ground a lot faster theoretically, right? Once they make
Theoretically.
right.
Now,
That's
the
always
problem with that is many operators still haven't put an actual standalone 5G core in. They're running their 5G radios off a 4G core. So
oh,
they still have to replace the 5G core. So there we go. Sorry, I got off topic a bit there. But if you want to say that's the basement level of 6G, that's what needs to happen. They need to have the standalone 5G core in. Now, everything else above that is what's being decided right now and throughout the rest of this year and into 2027 for basically it's going to be like network vendors, operators, and other interested parties all coming together for the kind of trade organization called the 3GP. And they're
yeah.
having lots of meetings all around the world. There was one this week in Singapore where they decided some stuff, which I've got some people looking at for me. So I'm going to report on that this week and possibly even next week as well. But yeah, one of the major features is called 6G ISAC or 6G sensing, which basically adds radar-like functionality to the basic communications network. Now, the problem with that is it's going to be really expensive to deploy high intensity Isaac kind of functions to a 6G network because you're going to have radios in more places than you ordinarily would have. Because,
What is the upshot? What is the advantage of integrating radar into the network?
well, it basically covers some of the stuff that people are doing with private 5G right now, where
Yeah,
they do little enterprise networks that for robotics and AGVs and things like that.
right.
Now, this would, at least in the way that they're selling it now, that this would make the wider public network part of that. But that remains to be seen as far as I'm concerned. But now I'm a bit of a cynic on these things, but there we go.
So I'm, like I said, continuing my man on the street knows about 30% of the subject. That's maybe
Right.
said that there's a scarcity of spectrum. The FCC has obviously given a big handout to satellite device to
Right.
device.
Yeah.
And the spectrum seems to be going the way of Musk and Bezos these days.
Yeah. Well,
And that affects 6G, correct?
that will affect 6G, but I think much of the satellite spectrum that they're using has been refarmed from 3G and 4G. You can, once they've switched networks off or elements of a network off, they can refarm the spectrum, which is basically going to be the only way that most people will have access to spectrum, or most operators have access to spectrum, unless they have billions and billions of dollars to spend on a spectrum auction.
Yeah, I mean, it's not infinite. There's a
No,
finite.
no, it's a very much a finite resource.
And where else can you cull from? I mean, is like the broadcast signals from terrestrial radio and television, are they?
But they've already started to do that. There were things like they called them white spaces spectrum, which I haven't actually looked out for a while, but they already started kind of compacting broadcast spectrum to add some more mobile spectrum. So again, as I say, it's a finite resource. So basically, they're going to have to get really religious about refarming spectrum to enable new kind of use cases to be evoked.
It gives a policymaker a lot of clout, I guess. You control.
Yes, yes. And also, like, the Trump people are obviously going to love an auction because that makes billions and billions of dollars. So there we go.
Speaking of which, I haven't caught up with the auction that started last week. It was the first
Right.
auction in quite a while. Maybe you could tell us about that a little bit.
I haven't really looked at it that much, but I don't think we're kind of, or at least in the way that auctions usually go, it's going to take a few weeks before we know how it'll shake out. And some of them have taken months and months. So there we
Got
go.
it. Got it. I always love ambushing you with topics we didn't talk about in
Right,
pre-production.
right.
So one we did was your story last week on AI RAN, which I didn't know hardly anything about it, and I want to learn more. So I did kind of a deep dive, and it seems like kind of pre 6G, a revolution. You can diagnose network issues a lot faster with the so-called intelligent network that this creates. Maybe you could educate us, Dan.
Yeah, a lot of what is going to be deployed with AI RAN, which is going to start to be kind of laid out probably sometime in 2027, because a lot of the testing is going to be talked about, because that's pretty much as soon as they can start to get testing stuff out. But what it'll do is it'll enable people to do a lot more kind of granular stuff on managing networks and managing the way that networks transmit stuff and things like that. So say you have, well, I mean, like, they already use a thing called self-optimized networks, and that uses what's called machine learning to grasp whether to deliver coverage to particular areas around the cell site and things like that.
It's resources are allocated based on
Yes, yeah.
intelligence.
that will get much more sophisticated as AI rolls out. And there's probably going to be some things around private networks and the ways those are managed because, you can basically say, well, I want to use this network in a very limited area, and rather than having it just kind of broadcasting willy-nilly over a certain area, then you can really shape it. But again, that's going to take some time.
Also exciting was humanoid robots
Oh, so exciting!
in the
Yeah,
near-term future. They always talk about, we watch. Well, I'm gonna go see Disclosure Day probably after this.
right.
When the aliens come, they won't have two eyes and won't have a head and two arms and legs. They won't be like us, but the robots will be. What is the functional? I guess it's a world built for humans, so you built humanoid robots. I guess that's the.
Maybe. I mean, like, who knows? I mean, maybe it'll be like an octopus, but
This is a business, I guess, that Musk wants to own too, or
oh yeah, but I imagine that the Chinese are going to really dominate in this area just because they seem to be already hot on its heels. I mean, the Chinese factories are already kind of like, or at least some of them are already starting to pump out some of these kind of very early humanoid robot designs. So
yeah, as you mentioned, that's obvious at CES in January in Las Vegas.
yeah, yeah. So there are a lot of people that want to get in on this.
A lot of people want to get in on next TMDT networks now in its third week. I know
Right.
the Telecom groupies are trying to find the location of your abode there. We're not disclosing it, Dan. So if they find out someplace else, that's not our fault here at the home office.
Right. It's somewhere in sunny Brooklyn.
So I'll let you. It's late. I went late West Coast time, which is super late your time. It's well
Right.
into your Friday evening by now. So
Yep.
hopefully you've got good recreational plans and
I think so. Yeah.
cut you loose and let you do your thing.
Right.
So I'm going to sign us out, and we'll do this again next week.
Okay.
Daniel Frankel, co-founder and CEO of NextTMT with NextTMT Networks editor Dan Jones. Thank you for joining us and watching the podcast, and we'll see you next week.
See you next week.